My pick of round 2 from the Korchnoi Zürich Chess Challenge is Viswanathan Anand against Yannick Pelletier. Anand needs no introduction. Yannick Pelletier is the strongest Swiss player. Now, he's rated a fair bit below Anand. However, he is capable of beating the strongest players in the world. Indeed, in 2015, he defeated Carlsen and Nakamura quite convincingly, so don't underestimate him. Pelletier plays the classical variation of the French. It's a variation that I've always favoured with black. I rather like it that black is able to strike out and get counterplay on the queen side and in the centre. And Pelletier goes for this quite trendy move, bishop e7. You can also play with knight c6 and a6 and so on. Certainly, it's been doing pretty well, bishop e7 recently. Knight c6, of course, is the standard move here. But Pelletier went for b6, and that's a little bit unusual. But it means that white can't automatically gain control over the d4 square by exchanging on c5. Of course, in this kind of situation, exchanging on c5 would be a disaster for white. Black now has wonderful central control. Those pawns control so many useful squares, including, of course, d4. So that's ruled out. It also means maybe sometimes black has this in mind, bishop a6, but okay, Pelletier plays with knight c6. And now Vichy thought for a couple of minutes, well, 3 minutes to be precise, which, well, in the opening, when you have only 45 minutes on the clock, is for Vichy, that's quite an investment. And he found this move, bishop b5. I mean, I think, for example, if one wanted to play modestly, there's nothing wrong with bishop e2 and castle's kingside. But bishop b5 is rather unusual. And one of the ideas is to simply clear away the f1 square, so that after, let's say, castle's queenside, this has been played before, a game between Benjamin Bock and Kjartansson, and one of the ideas is to break with f5 very, very quickly. And in this case, you can use the f-file easily, get to the f-file with a rook very, very quickly. So that's one of the ideas. Pelletier played knight b8. Okay, so this is looking very involved. Doesn't look very natural somehow. And Anand exploited this with the move queen f2. And this is a very nice move. So clearly with the battery of queen and bishop, there is pressure on the c5 pawn. So black has to make a decision. Do you take on d4? And that would give white good control over d4. And then, well, somehow black has been going backwards over these past few moves. You know, these queenside pieces don't look very well placed. White has a lead in development. The queen certainly sits extremely well on f2, not only helping to guard d4, but can later on move to the king's side. Or do you play as Pelletier did with c4, closing the position? But of course, now that the centre is closed, that gives Anand a freer hand on the king's side. So knight e2 played, and the intention is clear. White wants to stabilise the centre with c3, and in that case, then the bishop could sneak back to, well, the best diagonal on the board for the bishop, looking at the king's side. So that's why in this position Yannick hurried to claim that bishop before it runs away, actually. But of course, you know, that to some extent that gives white even more time. But okay, strategically, of course, black is happy to get that light squared bishop. But Anand has, now we see it so often in his games, he likes to play with knights against bishops. He goes against the accepted classical rules. But he does have a lead in development, and that gives white the opportunity to already launch an initiative on the king's side. So Anand played g4. And here is a big moment in the game. And Yannick Pelletier thought for, well, just about 12 minutes on this decision. And it's a huge decision. So he could just ignore g4 and play b4, and trying to set his queenside play in motion. And then, knight g3 could come, and f5 could come quickly, but perhaps black just has to live with that. That's possible to do that, and try to gain counterplay on the other side of the board. Or do you do as Pelletier did in this game and play h5 and break up those pawns? White cannot play h3, of course, because of the pin. It's a tough decision. With hindsight, well, who knows? Maybe b4 would have been better. I think the problem with this is that white's initiative actually grows very quickly. If black had time to stabilise and bring this knight, of course, round to f5, this would be a very different story. And here, Pelletier dropped the rook immediately. Anand said after the game he thought it might be better to maybe play b4 and let white push the rook back, because then maybe the knight isn't so well placed on g3. Well, we'll see what you mean in a second. So the rook came back, and now queen g2 is a nice move. If g6, then white can open the g-file straight away and come in with the queen. Bishop f8. And now it's very important that white breaks before black brings this knight around to this beautiful square on f5. So f5 is very logical, and Anand played this after precisely 7 seconds. So a pawn sacrifice, but a very natural one in this kind of position. So it just opens up the dart squares for the bishop, but also for the knight. They want to come here. Anand said afterwards that he was considering queen a5 with the idea of b4, and then the queen protects the d-pawn, but he thought knight d2 was a good response. The point being that already the queen attacks d5, and if b4, then that queen on g2 is beautifully placed, and knew exactly what he was doing when he put the queen on g2. Knight c4 exploits this pin. So Pelletier was wise to that and played queen c7. And Anand rolls on. And this is beautiful. h6. Very, very simple. Of course, there's a curious situation that if this pawn is captured, then bishop f6 and queen g8 wins a rook. It's that simple. Pelletier played king d7, and now pushing the pawn to h7 was too hard to resist. It's not going to go any further for a very long time, but it's added pressure for Pelletier, and it's not going away. It's extremely hard to eliminate that pawn, if not impossible for black. A very nice move, and already black is in a dire situation. It's happened so quickly. Bishop d2. So with bishop d2, Anand simply wants to put his knights on f4 and g5, and then after exchanging on e6, something will happen. But this is a very interesting moment. I was commentating live on the game, and I was just thinking, yeah, of course, just knight f4, knight g5. And I thought for a few minutes here, and came up with a4. And this is such a far-sighted move. We'll see the point to this in a second. Again, during the game I was slightly mystified. Of course, black needs to close the position with b4. But so I couldn't quite understand what Anand was up to. But let's see what happens in the game. Okay, so he returns to this main strategy of deploying the knights on f4 and g5. So there's going to be some kind of threat later on to take here and put the knight into g6, for example. So g6, and the point is that here now black is able to defend laterally with the queen, so can eliminate that pawn. So white can't break through straight away, but things are coming. Anand said after the game king f2 would have been better. He played king f1, and he gets there in a second, but king f2 would have been slightly quicker than the game. I'll explain why in a second. Here again, white would love to be able to take here and play queen g6. Looks crushing, but rook e7, and there are three black major pieces attacking that pawn on h7, and white loses the pawn. So therefore Anand has to play rook e2 first, and only then take on e6, because in this case, after queen takes g6, rook e7, rook e-h2 holds the pawn. Now there are three defending it, and of course this is completely and utterly lost. It won't be long before something like queen g8 and knight g6. Well, this is very simple to win. Pelletier played knight takes e6, and again we see why Anand placed his queen on g2, because in this case knight takes d5 is possible, and with these wonderful centre pawns in combination with the pawn on h7, of course white is completely winning. Let's just zip through the next few moves and I can explain why Anand played a4, or it'll be evident why he played a4. Of course, if rook takes pawn, then bishop takes knight, and if knight takes pawn, then bishop g7 followed by rook takes knight. Therefore rook e8, and Anand just played this so efficiently. And with this next move, rook h4, we can see why Anand played a4, because he wanted to bring that pawn forward. It was protecting the pawn on c4, and he wanted to make sure that black is being killed on every side of the board. So now black's king is just coming under fire. It's absolutely desperate. And Anand said that this was precisely why he played this move a4 so many moves ago, because he was already looking ahead to a situation where he might be able to, or will be able to, break through. He was confident of breaking through, but he just wanted to make sure it was completely and utterly winning when he did so. So now black's king is on the run, and Anand is, well, it's lock and load time. e6, of course, if that's exchanged here, then the king comes under fire. Rook e7, and now queen g5, and that was the end of the game.